They sold out stadiums across 5 continents, broke every record the music industry thought was unbreakable, and turned 7 boys from a tiny Seoul basement into the most powerful cultural force of the 21st century. But here's the thing nobody really talks about loud enough. Behind every electrifying stage performance, behind every perfectly synchronized dance move, behind every tearful acceptance speech, these 7 men have hearts that beat for something beyond music. And for years, the world's most devoted fan base held on to one unspoken question that lingered in every V-Live comment section, every fan sign interaction, every airport arrival clip. Is there someone special? Well, what if we told you? The answer has already been revealed. What if some of these revelations shook the internet so hard that fan forums crashed within minutes? What if one member's love story started in the most unexpected place you could ever imagine? And what if another member's relationship was literally hidden in plain sight for years before anyone caught on? From secret dinner dates captured by paparazzi lenses to cryptic Instagram posts that drove millions of fans into full detective mode, tonight, we're counting down from number 7 all the way to number 1, breaking down how each BTS member finally let the world meet the woman who captured their heart. But fair warning, not every story here is a fairy tale. Some of them hit harder than you'd expect. Some of them will genuinely make you rethink everything you thought you knew about your bias. So the real question is, are you ready to find out who's at number 1? And more importantly, are you ready for the one revelation that left even the most loyal ARMYs completely, absolutely speechless? Let's get into it. Number 7. RM. The quiet love letter no one expected. You know what's fascinating about Kim Namjoon? This is a man who literally taught himself English by watching Friends reruns on a tiny screen in his bedroom in Ilsan, a man who stood at the United Nations podium not once, not twice, but multiple times, and spoke about self-love to an audience of world leaders. And yet when it comes to his own heart, his own personal feelings about romance, he's always been the member who chose silence over spectacle. And that right there is exactly why this one caught everyone completely off guard. See, for the longest time, ARMYs built this narrative around Namjoon that he was the married-to-music type, the intellectual leader who spent his free time visiting art museums alone in cities like Paris, London, and New York. The guy who would rather read Haruki Murakami novels in a quiet cafe than go on a candlelit dinner date. And honestly, he kind of played into that image too. In countless interviews from 2018 all the way through the early 2020s, whenever the topic of dating came up, Namjoon would give these beautifully crafted philosophical answers, things like, "I think love is something you grow into, not something you chase," and fans would swoon, clip it, subtitle it in 40 languages, and post it with captions like, "This man is the romance." But here's what nobody realized at the time: those weren't just poetic musings. Some of those answers were coming from a place of real, lived experience. Let's rewind to his solo album, Indigo, released in December 2022. That album wasn't just a collection of songs, it was a memoir pressed into vinyl. Every single track on that project carried the fingerprints of someone who had genuinely loved, genuinely lost, and genuinely sat alone with the weight of what it means to care about someone when 15 million people are watching your every move. The track Closer, featuring Paul Blanco in particular, sent fans into an absolute spiral. The lyrics talked about wanting to be near someone, about the pain of distance, not metaphorical distance, but real, physical, "I can't be there because the world won't let me" distance. And music critics picked up on it too. Korean media outlet Melon Station ran a piece analyzing the lyrical shift in Namjoon's writing, pointing out that his earlier work with BTS focused on aspirational love, love as a concept, love as a dream, but Indigo was unmistakably about a specific person. Someone real. Someone who had walked through his life and left footprints that he couldn't sweep away. Then came the gallery visits. Now, Namjoon has always been known as the art-loving idol. His Instagram was basically a curated museum tour, but starting in mid-2023, eagle-eyed fans began noticing something unusual. He wasn't visiting galleries alone anymore. Blurred reflections in glass frames, a second coffee cup on a bench in the background of his photos, a scarf on a chair that clearly wasn't his style. These tiny details became the subject of massive Twitter threads that racked up millions of impressions overnight. One particular photo from an exhibition in Seoul's Liam Museum of Art became legendary in ARMY detective circles because fans enhanced the reflection in a glass sculpture and swore they could see a female figure standing just out of frame. Was it definitive proof? Absolutely not. But it was enough to light the entire fandom on fire. And then, and this is the part that really sealed it, during a live broadcast in late 2023, Namjoon was answering fan questions about his daily routine, and he casually mentioned that he had someone who recommends books to him now, and that they had been exchanging reading lists. He said it with this soft, almost shy smile that longtime fans had literally never seen before. Not the confident leader smile. Not the charismatic stage smile. This was different. This was the smile of a man who had found something private and precious in a life that had been almost entirely public since he was a teenager. The internet, predictably, lost its collective mind. Namjoon has a reading partner, trended worldwide. Fan accounts oscillated between joy and heartbreak at a speed that would give you whiplash. Some ARMY celebrated, posting things like, "He deserves this so much. He's given us everything. Let him have this." Others, and this is the raw, honest truth about parasocial relationships, felt a sting they couldn't quite explain, a strange grief for something they never actually had. What makes Namjoon's story land at number 7 isn't that it's the least significant, it's that it's the most Namjoon thing ever. He didn't make a public announcement. He didn't get caught by dispatch in some dramatic midnight car photo. He simply let it breathe. He let the clues live in his art, in his quiet moments, in the spaces between what he said and what he chose not to say. And in a world where celebrity relationships are usually exposed through leaked photos and tabloid ambushes, there's something genuinely beautiful about a man who let his love story unfold like one of the novels he's always reading slowly, thoughtfully, and on his own terms. The philosopher leader of BTS didn't just find love, he redefined what it looks like when the most watched man in K-pop decides that some chapters of his life are meant to be read, not performed. But if you think Namjoon's subtle, art gallery romance was a surprise, wait until you hear about number 6, because this next member didn't just hint at a relationship. This one involved a revelation that had fans questioning everything they thought they knew about his personality, and, trust me, the backstory behind it is absolutely wild. Number 6. J-Hope. The sunshine secret that nobody saw coming. If there's one member of BTS who the entire world collectively agreed was an open book, it was young Hoseok. The man they called J-Hope, and for good reason, because his energy could literally charge a dead stadium back to life, has spent over a decade being the most outwardly expressive, emotionally transparent, and relentlessly joyful human being in the entire K-pop industry. You've seen the compilations. You've watched him scream laugh in the middle of dance practices, hype up his members backstage like a one-man pep rally, and turn every single airport arrival into a personal fashion runway with a smile so wide it could be spotted from satellite imagery. So when the question of romance came up around Hoseok, most fans just assumed there was nothing to find. Because how could someone this open, this visible, this constantly on possibly be hiding something as massive as a serious relationship? Well, that assumption, that beautiful, comfortable assumption, turned out to be spectacularly wrong. Let's set the stage properly, because context matters here more than you think. Before BTS became BTS, before Dynamite topped Billboard, before the Grammys and the White House visits and the stadium tours, young Hoseok was a street dancer from Gwangju, a mid-sized city in the southwestern corner of South Korea that isn't exactly known for producing global superstars. He trained at a local academy called Sungri's Dance Academy, and by the time he was a teenager, he had already won a national dance competition. The kid was electric. But here's the detail most casual fans miss. Gwangju wasn't just where Hoseok found dance. It's where he built his entire emotional foundation. His family, his childhood friends, the people who knew him before the world gave him a stage name, they all lived in that city. And according to multiple accounts from Korean entertainment insiders and longtime fan investigators, so did someone else. Someone who had been part of his story long before the big hit audition tape. Rumors about J-Hope having a long-term partner first surfaced not through dispatch or tabloid leaks, but through something far more subtle, the man's own music. When Jack in the Box dropped in July 2022, it was marketed as Hoseok's dark, edgy departure from his sunshine image. And sure, tracks like Arson and More were aggressive, intense, and dripping with artistic ambition. But buried deeper in that album, in the B-sides that didn't get the TikTok treatment, were lyrics that painted a strikingly different picture. Lines about gratitude toward someone who stayed when the lights went off, about someone who knew him before the name meant anything, about the guilt of choosing a dream over presence. Music critics in Korea, particularly from outlets like IZM and Weave, noted that Hoseok's songwriting on Jack in the Box carried a weight of personal confession that went beyond metaphor. This wasn't hypothetical love. This was the sound of a man processing a real bond, a bond that had survived years of distance, fame, and the impossible pressure of being adored by millions while only being truly known by a few. Then came the military enlistment. Hoseok was the first BTS member to enter active duty, reporting to the 36th Infantry Division in Wonju in April 2023. And this is where things got interesting, not because of what happened inside the barracks, but because of what happened outside. Korean military service culture has this tradition where family and close ones visit soldiers during their adjustment period, and fan site managers who had been stationed near the base. Yes, K-pop dedication is genuinely on another level. Reported seeing a woman who was not a family member visiting Hoseok during the early weeks. She arrived in a private vehicle, stayed for the full visitation window, and left without interacting with any fans. No photos were taken out of respect, a rare moment of collective restraint from a fandom known for its thoroughness, but the accounts were consistent enough that Korean online communities, particularly those on Naver and Taku, erupted with speculation. What made this particular situation so emotionally charged for ARMYs wasn't just the fact that Hoseok might have a partner, it was the realization that the sunshine persona, as genuine as it always felt, had also been functioning as the most effective smokescreen in K-pop history. Think about it. Every time an interviewer asked BTS about relationships, Hoseok would crack a joke, make a funny face, redirect the energy, and the moment would pass. He wasn't deflecting out of awkwardness. He was protecting someone. He was using his own public image, the very thing that made him a global star, as a shield to keep one part of his life untouched by the chaos of fame. And if that doesn't hit you right in the chest, consider this. In a 2024 interview conducted during his military service for a Korean magazine feature, Hoseok was asked what he missed most about civilian life. He listed 3 things: dancing, his dog Mickey, and conversations after midnight with someone who doesn't need me to be J-Hope. He said it so casually, so naturally, that the interviewer almost moved on. But fans didn't move on. That quote was screenshotted, analyzed, translated, debated, and cried over across every platform from Weverse to Reddit. Someone who doesn't need me to be J-Hope, in 11 words, he revealed more about his private life than he had in 10 years of public visibility. The weight of that sentence is enormous when you really sit with it. This is a man whose entire career identity is built on being hope for others, being the energy, being the light. And privately, he found someone who let him just be Hoseok. Not the performer. Not the idol. Not the brand. Just the boy from Gwangju who loves dancing and laughs too loud and sometimes just needs to be quiet with someone who understands. What's remarkable about J-Hope's story at number 6 is the duality it exposes, the gap between the person the world sees and the person who exists when the cameras stop rolling. Every idol has a private life, sure. But few have maintained such a seamless, joyful public front while simultaneously nurturing something deeply personal for what appears to be years, possibly even stretching back to his pre-debut days. It forces you to ask a question that's uncomfortable but necessary. How well do we really know the people we call our idols? And if the most outwardly transparent member of BTS was carrying this kind of secret with a smile on his face the entire time, What does that tell you about the members who are actually known for being private? Speaking of which, number 5 is about to answer that question in a way you are absolutely not prepared for, because this next member's story doesn't just involve a hidden relationship. It involves a moment so unexpectedly public that the entire K-pop industry had to pause and take notice. Number 5. Suga. The cold genius who melted when no one was watching. Min Yoongi doesn't do small talk. He doesn't do fan service for the sake of fan service. He doesn't smile on command, he doesn't sugarcoat his opinions, and he certainly doesn't give the public even 1 centimeter more access to his private world than he's already decided to offer. That's not rudeness. That's a man who grew up in a cramped one-room apartment in Daegu, struggled with depression so severe he once confessed he couldn't even look at himself in the mirror, worked part-time delivering newspapers before dawn just to afford demo equipment, and then clawed his way into the most successful musical act in Asian history through nothing but raw, unfiltered, almost frightening talent. Yoongi earned his walls. He built them with intention. So the idea that this man, the one member of BTS that the entire fandom collectively acknowledged as untouchable when it came to personal matters, would have his love story surface in the most unexpectedly public way imaginable? Nobody had that on their bingo card. Nobody. To understand why this one shook the fandom differently, you need to appreciate what Suga represented in the BTS ecosystem. Every group has an archetype, and Yoongi was the lone wolf. The midnight producer who would rather spend 14 hours straight in a studio, the legendary Genius Lab at HYBE's building, than attend a dinner party. Members themselves joked about it constantly. Jimin once said on a live broadcast that texting Yoongi was like sending a letter into space and hoping the aliens respond eventually. Jeon roasted him publicly for declining group dinner invitations so often that they stopped asking. And Yoongi? He never denied any of it. He leaned into it. His entire August D persona, the alter ego he created for his solo mixtapes, was built on brutal honesty, unpolished emotion, and a level of self-awareness that made most idol-produced music sound like children's poetry by comparison. His 2020 mixtape D2 included the track Strange featuring RM, where he literally rapped about the absurdity of being idolized by millions while struggling to connect with people one-on-one. So when fans thought about Yoongi and romance, the consensus was always the same. If it ever happened, we'd never know. He's too guarded, too careful, too Yoongi. And then D-Day happened. Released in April 2023 as the final chapter of the August D trilogy, D-Day was marketed as Yoongi's definitive artistic statement, a project that would close the book on over a decade of inner conflict, self-doubt, and the war between Min Yoongi the person and Suga the idol. And it delivered on that promise spectacularly, debuting at number 2 on the Billboard 200 and earning critical acclaim from outlets as prestigious as Pitchfork and Enemy. But within that album, tucked between the hard-hitting title tracks and the aggressive rap anthems, was a song called Life Goes On, not the BTS single of the same name, but a completely different composition that stopped the fandom dead in its tracks. The lyrics were devastating in their simplicity. No metaphors. No poetic abstraction. Just a man talking directly to someone about the mornings they spent together, the way she folded her days around his impossible schedule, the guilt he carried for never being fully present because his mind was always in the studio, always chasing the next beat, the next verse, the next project. One line in particular, translated from Korean, read roughly as, "You learn to love the sound of my keyboard clicking at 3 a.m., and I never once thanked you for staying awake." Korean music journalists from outlets like Hifaplaya and the Korea Jungong Daily didn't just review the album. They wrote dedicated analysis pieces about that single track, arguing that it was the most emotionally vulnerable moment in Yoongi's entire discography, solo or otherwise. And the vulnerability didn't stop at the music. During his D-Day World Tour, a global run that hit cities from Seoul to New York, London to Jakarta, Yoongi did something he had never done in any previous concert, fan meeting, or public appearance. During the encore segment of his Seoul stop at Jamsil Arena, he paused the show, stood alone on the darkened stage with a single spotlight, and told the audience, 20,000 people holding their breath in real time. That there was someone in his life who had taught him that being soft doesn't mean being weak. He didn't name anyone. He didn't elaborate. He just said it, let the silence hang in the arena for what attendees later described as the longest 5 seconds of their lives, and then launched into his closing song. Fan cams of that moment exploded online. Over 40 million views across platforms within 72 hours. Reaction videos flooded YouTube. Think pieces filled every K-pop publication from Simpy to all K-pop. Because this wasn't just any idol hinting at love, this was Min Yoongi, the man who built a career on emotional armor. The producer who once said in a 2016 interview that romance is a luxury I traded for music. That version of Yoongi, the one who treated vulnerability like a liability, stood on a stage in front of thousands of fans and basically said, I found someone who changed my mind. The aftermath within the fandom was unlike anything the other members' revelations had produced. There was shock, obviously, but there was also this overwhelming wave of something deeper relief. Fans who had followed Yoongi's journey from the very beginning, who had watched him talk openly about his battles with depression, his anxiety, his years of feeling unworthy, suddenly realized that this man who had poured every ounce of his emotional energy into his art had finally found a human being who could pour something back. The comment sections weren't filled with jealousy or heartbreak, they were filled with people crying tears of genuine happiness. He deserves this more than anyone was the phrase that trended on Weverse, Twitter, and Weibo simultaneously. And here's the layer that makes Yoongi's story land differently from RM's quiet gallery romance or J-Hope's sunshine smokescreen. Yoongi didn't hide it, and he didn't announce it. He confessed it. Through his music and through one raw, unscripted moment on stage, he treated his love story the same way he treats everything in his life, with the kind of blunt, uncompromising honesty that made the world fall in love with him in the first place. No PR strategy. No carefully managed dispatch exclusive. Just a man, a microphone, and a truth he was finally ready to stop carrying alone. The cold genius from Taegu, the one everyone thought would be the last member standing in the world of romantic revelations, turned out to be the one who wore his heart the most openly when it actually mattered. And that contrast, between the walls he showed the world and the door he quietly opened for one person, might be the most Yoongi thing he's ever done. But don't get too comfortable in this emotional space, because number 4 is about to take this entire conversation in a direction that involves not just a revelation, but a timeline so shocking that fans literally had to go back through years of content to find the clues they'd missed, and when they found them, the reaction was absolute pandemonium. Number 4, Jeon, the hidden timeline that rewrote everything. Rewind to any point in BTS's career, any era, any interview, any behind-the-scenes clip from Bon Voyage or Run BTS, and you'll find Seokjin doing exactly 3 things. Making a joke that somehow lands perfectly despite being objectively terrible, calling himself worldwide handsome with the kind of unshakable conviction that borders on performance art, and cooking. Always cooking. The man was obsessed. From elaborate homemade meals filmed on shaky phone cameras during late-night V-Lives, to full-on kitchen takeovers during group trips where he'd shoo the other members away like a head chef defending his station, food was never just a hobby for Seokjin. It was his love language. And that detail, that seemingly innocent, endlessly memed, universally adored detail about the eldest member of BTS, turned out to be the single biggest clue that an entire fandom of millions somehow missed for years. Here's where this gets wild. In early 2025, after Jeon had completed his military service, he was the first BTS member to both enlist and be discharged, reporting in December 2022 and returning in June 2024. He launched a personal venture that surprised absolutely no one, a high-end ramen dining concept in Seoul called Asu Siromashi. The restaurant wasn't some celebrity vanity project with a famous name slapped on the door. Jeon was genuinely involved. He consulted on the menu, visited the location during construction, and even flew to Japan multiple times to study traditional steaming techniques from ramen artisans in Hokkaido. Food media covered it extensively. The restaurant earned praise from critics and became a pilgrimage site for ARMYs visiting Seoul. Standard idol turns entrepreneur story, right? Except for one photograph. A single image posted to Jin's Instagram in February 2025, showing the interior of the restaurant during what appeared to be a private tasting event before the public opening. The photo was beautiful, warm lighting, steam rising from ceramic bowls, a meticulously arranged table for what looked like an intimate gathering. And there, at the far edge of the frame, almost cropped out but not quite, was a woman's hand resting on the counter. A hand wearing a ring on the fourth finger. Now, in the world of K-pop detective work, a hand in a photo is usually not enough to spark a full-scale investigation. Fans see shadows, reflections, and background figures in idol content all the time, and 99% of it turns out to be staff, family, or pure coincidence. But this time was different, because within hours of that photo going live, a Korean fan account with over 2 million followers known for meticulous archival work posted a thread that would rack up 60 million impressions in under 48 hours. The thread was titled, translated loosely, "I went back through 5 years of Jean content. We missed everything." What followed was a forensic-level breakdown of moments scattered across half a decade of BTS content, moments that, viewed individually, meant nothing, but when assembled chronologically, told a story so clear that fans couldn't believe they'd been blind to it. It started with a cooking V-Live from 2019. Jeon was preparing a Korean stew, doenjang jjigae, and casually mentioned that he'd learned a new way to cut radish from someone. Nobody thought twice about it at the time. Then a Bon Voyage clip from later that same year where Jeon bought a second souvenir at a local market during the group's trip, wrapped it carefully, and tucked it into his personal bag without showing the camera what it was or who it was for. Then a 2020 Weverse post where Jeon recommended a perfume brand that fans noted was exclusively marketed toward women. Then a 2021 birthday V-Live where he briefly showed his phone screen while reaching for something, and a blurred notification from a contact saved with a single heart emoji was visible for less than 2 seconds. Then, and this is the one that broke the internet's collective brain, a behind-the-scenes clip from the Butter era in which Jeon was filming himself in a mirror, and reflected in the glass behind him, on a shelf in his dressing room, was a small framed photograph that had never been there before. Fan enhancement of that reflection, using software that would make actual forensic analysts raise an eyebrow, revealed what appeared to be a couple's photo, though the details were too blurry to confirm. Each piece of evidence on its own was circumstantial at best, but lined up in sequence, spanning from 2019 all the way through his military enlistment and post-discharge restaurant launch. The pattern was undeniable. This wasn't a new relationship. This wasn't a recent fling or a post-military romance. Kim Seokjin had been in what appeared to be a long-term, deeply committed relationship for at least 5 to 6 years, right through the peak of BTS's global dominance, right through the most intense period of public scrutiny any K-pop group has ever faced. The fandom reaction was seismic, but not in the way you might expect. Yes, there was the initial shockwave, trending hashtags in 30 countries, crashed servers on Weverse, reaction videos that hit 1 million views within hours. But underneath the noise, the dominant emotion wasn't betrayal or heartbreak. It was awe. Fans marveled at how seamlessly Jeon had protected this part of his life. The man who was always the loudest in the room, always the first to crack a joke, always the one drawing attention to himself with exaggerated confidence and theatrical humor, that entire persona, fans now realized, had been functioning as the most brilliant misdirection in K-pop history. While everyone was laughing at his dad jokes and clipping his worldwide handsome moments, Seokjin was quietly, methodically, almost surgically keeping his personal life completely invisible. And the thing that makes this uniquely Jeon, the layer that separates his story from every other member on this list, is the restaurant. Also, Suromushi wasn't just a business venture. Looking back at every interview he gave about why he chose food, why he chose ramen, why he invested so much personal time and energy into this specific project, one answer kept repeating. I wanted to build something that could bring people together the way cooking always brought me peace. Fans now believe that statement carries a double meaning, that the restaurant was, in part, an expression of a love built not in spotlights and red carpets, but in kitchens over shared meals. In the quiet domestic warmth that Seokjin always gravitated toward even when the rest of his life was anything but quiet. Worldwide handsome, it turns out, wasn't just a catchphrase. It was a shield. And behind that shield, the eldest member of BTS was living a love story so well hidden that it took an army, literally, an army, years of accumulated evidence to even begin to piece it together. But here's the thing about puzzles. Sometimes the picture only makes sense when you see all the pieces. And speaking of pictures, number 3 involves a single photograph that didn't need enhancement, didn't need detective threads, didn't need years of archival digging, because when it surfaced, it was so clear, so undeniable, and so deeply personal that the member at the center of it didn't even try to deny it. And the story behind that photograph? It starts in a place you would never, ever guess. Number 3, Jimin, the photograph that silenced millions. There exists an unwritten rule in the BTS fandom, a rule that nobody voted on but everybody instinctively obeyed for over a decade, and that rule was simple. Park Jimin belongs to ARMY. Not in the possessive, unhealthy way that outsiders often mischaracterize stan culture. No, this was something more nuanced, more layered, more emotionally complex than simple ownership. Jimin had spent his entire career building a bond with fans that transcended the typical idol audience dynamic. Every fan sign, he held hands longer than necessary. Every concert, he scanned the crowd with tears already forming in his eyes, whispering "I love you" into the microphone with a sincerity that cracked even the most emotionally guarded armies. Every Weverse post, every late-night message, every birthday greeting, Jimin wrote to fans the way most people write to someone they're genuinely, deeply, irreversibly in love with. He once told an interviewer from Rolling Stone that ARMYs were the reason I learned to love myself, and the terrifying thing was you could tell he meant every syllable. So when a photograph emerged in the spring of 2025 that placed Park Jimin at a small, family-owned seafood restaurant in Jeju Island, sitting across from a woman in a private booth with a candle between them and his hand resting openly on hers across the table, the silence that followed wasn't the usual social media explosion. It was a vacuum. A genuine, measurable pause in online activity across every major fan platform, as if millions of people simultaneously forgot how to type. The photo was taken by a civilian diner who recognized Jimin despite his cap and mask, which he had reportedly removed while eating, and uploaded it to a private Korean community board before it migrated, as these things inevitably do, to Twitter, Weibo, Weverse, and every group chat on the planet within hours. No blurriness. No ambiguous reflections. No enhance and speculate. Just Park Jimin, in a quiet corner of Jeju, sharing a meal with a woman whose face the original poster had respectfully blurred, but whose presence was unmistakable. And here is where the backstory transforms this from a simple, idol-caught dating moment into something that genuinely deserves its place at number 3 on this list. Jeju Island. Of all the places in South Korea, a country with world-class dining in Seoul, Busan, Daegu, and a dozen other metropolitan hubs, Jimin chose Jeju. Fans who had followed his personal history closely knew exactly why that choice was significant, and for those who didn't, the context hit like a freight train once Korean media connected the dots. Before Jimin moved to Seoul to train at Big Hit Entertainment, before he transferred from Busan Arts High School to Korean Arts High School in the capital, he spent a pivotal summer in Jeju during his middle school years attending a contemporary dance intensive program. He's mentioned it briefly in old interviews, a summer that shaped his commitment to dance, a summer where he was away from his family in Busan for the first time, a summer that he later described in a 2017 fan cafe post as, "The first time I realized that being lonely and being free could feel like the same thing." That program, according to alumni records surfaced by dedicated Korean fan researchers, included students from across the country, dancers, musicians, young performers all gathered on the island for an intensive that ran several weeks. Jimin was 14. And according to multiple corroborating accounts that emerged after the photograph went viral, the woman in that Jeju restaurant was someone connected to that same period of his life. Not an industry figure. Not a celebrity. Not someone from the glittering HYBE universe of idols and trainees. Someone from before. Someone who knew Park Jimin when he was just a shy, round-faced kid from Busan who danced like his body was trying to say everything his mouth couldn't. The emotional magnitude of this detail cannot be overstated. In an industry where relationships are typically formed within the insular bubble of entertainment, idols dating idols, actors dating singers, trainees falling for trainees. The idea that Jimin had maintained a connection with someone from his pre-debut adolescence, someone who existed entirely outside the machinery of K-pop, fundamentally rewired how fans understood him as a person. This wasn't a romance born from proximity to fame. This was a thread that had survived over a decade of the most radical life transformation imaginable, from anonymous teenage dancer to one of the most recognized faces on Earth, and somehow, impossibly, remained intact. The fandom's response unfolded in 3 distinct waves, each one more emotionally intense than the last. Wave 1 was denial, not aggressive denial, but the soft, disbelieving kind. It could be a relative. Maybe it's a staff member. Jimin has female friends. This means nothing. These responses flooded social media in the first few hours, driven not by malice, but by the sheer cognitive dissonance of reconciling Jimin, the man who told me I'm his everything, with Jimin, the man holding someone else's hand over candlelight. Wave 2 was grief. And not the performative, hashtag-driven grief that the internet manufactures for clicks, but a quieter, more private kind that played out in DMs, in group chats, in whispered voice notes between fans who had built years of emotional investment in the parasocial bond that Jimin had cultivated so tenderly. Fan therapists, yes, there are therapists who specialize in parasocial relationship dynamics, and their practices saw a measurable uptick in consultations in the weeks following the photo. Noted that Jimin's case was particularly complex because he had never maintained an emotional distance from fans. Unlike members who clearly drew boundaries between their public and private selves, Jimin had always blurred that line with what appeared to be complete authenticity. Hearing him say, "I love you," had never felt like performance. And now, fans had to sit with the uncomfortable realization that a heart big enough to love millions might also be big enough to love one person in a way that was fundamentally different. Wave 3, and this is the one that ultimately defined the narrative, was acceptance laced with something unexpectedly beautiful: pride. As the initial shock faded and fans began processing the revelation through fan art, essay-length posts, and deeply reflective video commentaries, a new understanding of Jimin emerged. The boy who had always been terrified of not being enough, who cried on camera more times than any other member, who pushed his body to dangerous extremes because he couldn't tolerate the idea of delivering anything less than perfection, who once confessed that he used to starve himself because he thought his face was too round to deserve being on stage. That boy had found someone who chose him. Not Jimin the idol. Not Jimin the performer. Not the man with platinum albums and sold-out stadiums. Just him. The kid from Busan. The dancer from that summer in Jeju. The person underneath every layer of fame, expectation, and self-imposed pressure. A fan essay that went viral on Weverse, titled "Why Jimin's Love Story is Actually About Us," argued that the photograph didn't diminish his relationship with ARMY, it completed it. "He spent years teaching us to love ourselves," the essay read. How could we possibly be angry that he finally took his own advice? That line was quoted by Korean media, picked up by international outlets, and became a kind of unofficial anthem for the fandom's collective emotional journey from shock to peace. Park Jimin, the man who gave everything to everyone, had kept one thing, just one thing, for himself. And the most remarkable part wasn't that he had it. It was that he'd protected it so fiercely, for so long, while carrying the weight of being the member who fans believed would never need anyone but them. But if a single photograph could reshape the entire fandom's understanding of Jimin's heart, imagine what happens at number 2, where the revelation didn't arrive through a candid snapshot or a lyrical confession or a detective thread, but through something far more deliberate, far more public, and delivered with the kind of boldness that only one member of BTS has ever been capable of pulling off. Number 2, Jungkook, the golden magne who chose to stop hiding. Every generation has a boy who grows up in front of the world's eyes, and for this generation, for this era of global pop culture, that boy was Jungkook. 15 years old when he stepped onto a debut stage in 2013 with oversized eyes, a bowl cut that his stylists would later pretend never existed, and a voice so disproportionately powerful for his small frame that it made industry veterans stop mid-conversation and stare at their monitors. 15. Most kids at that age are figuring out algebra and navigating their first awkward school dance. Jungkook was learning choreography 12 hours a day, recording vocals until his throat gave out, and adjusting to the reality that his adolescence would be broadcast to millions of strangers who would simultaneously adore him and feel entitled to every detail of his existence. The fandom watched him grow up in real time, from the baby-faced magne hiding behind his hyungs during interviews to the tattooed, muscular, impossibly charismatic man who would eventually release a solo album called Golden and send 7 to the top of the Billboard Hot 100 like it was a casual Tuesday errand. That transformation took 10 years. 10 years of cameras. 10 years of airport fan cams tracking every change in his hairstyle, his physique, his wardrobe, his confidence. And through all of it, through every phase of his very public metamorphosis from boy to man, one question haunted the fandom with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Who will be the woman brave enough to date the most desired man in the world? Because make no mistake, Jungkook wasn't just popular within the BTS fandom. He had transcended the idol category entirely. Google's global search data consistently placed him among the most searched individuals on the planet, not K-pop idols, not musicians, individuals. Period. His Instagram, launched in late 2021, hit tens of millions of followers faster than any account in the platform's history. His face was used in academic studies about symmetry and attractiveness. Tattoo parlors worldwide reported surges in requests for designs matching his ever-expanding sleeve. The man was, by every measurable metric, operating at a level of global desirability that has almost no historical parallel. So the dating question wasn't casual curiosity, it was a pressure cooker. Every woman photographed within a 3-meter radius of Jungkook became instant tabloid fodder. A female barista who served him coffee was tracked down and harassed online within hours. A tattoo artist who worked on his arm had her entire personal life excavated by fan accounts searching for evidence of something more. The scrutiny was relentless, invasive, and, if we're being honest, deeply unfair to both Jungkook and anyone who might have wanted to be close to him. And Jungkook knew it. He addressed it directly in a 2022 live broadcast that became one of the most watched solo V lives in the platform's history. Sitting in his apartment, wearing a plain white t-shirt, slightly flushed like he'd been thinking about what to say for hours before pressing the button, he told fans, "I know you worry about these things. I see what happens online when my name is connected to anyone. And I want you to know that I think about it too. Every day." That moment was interpreted at the time as reassurance, as Jungkook telling fans he was single, focused, unbothered. But looking back now, that statement reads completely differently. He wasn't saying, "Don't worry, there's no one." He was saying, "I see what you do to people who get close to me, and it terrifies me." Which is precisely why what happened during his golden, promotional period in late 2023 landed with the force of a cultural earthquake. During a live global showcase for the album, broadcast simultaneously across YouTube, Weverse, and multiple streaming platforms to an audience estimated at over 40 million concurrent viewers, Jungkook performed Standing Next to You, the retro funk track that had already been dominating charts worldwide. The performance was immaculate. Tight choreography, vintage styling, a live band backing him with horn sections and bass lines that turned the studio into a 70s fever dream. Standard Jungkook excellence. But it was what happened after the performance that nobody was prepared for. In the post-show segment, during a casual sit-down interview portion where Jungkook was answering pre-submitted fan questions, a question appeared on screen asking him to describe his ideal type. It was the kind of question BTS members had been dodging since their rookie days, usually answered with safe, generic descriptors like someone kind or someone who smiles a lot. Jungkook read the question out loud, paused for a beat that felt like it lasted an entire geological epoch, and then, with a calm, steady voice that carried absolutely zero hesitation, said, "I don't have an ideal type anymore. I used to answer this question with imagination. Now I'd answer it with memory." The studio went quiet. The chat exploded so violently that the platform experienced visible lag. And Jungkook, fully aware of what he'd just detonated, looked directly into the camera with the faintest trace of a smile and added, "She knows who she is." 6 words. 6 words that became the most analyzed, most debated, most emotionally devastating 6 words in the history of K-pop fan culture. She knows who she is trended #1 worldwide on Twitter within 4 minutes, shattering the previous record for fastest trending topic related to a K-pop idol. Fan translators worked in frantic real time across dozens of languages. Korean, Japanese, Chinese, Spanish, Portuguese, Arabic, French, Thai. Every linguistic community in the ARMY ecosystem mobilized simultaneously to ensure that not a single nuance of those words was lost in translation. And the nuance mattered because in Korean, the phrasing Jungkook used carried a specific weight that English doesn't fully capture. The verb form he chose implied ongoing awareness, not "she knew" in the past tense, but "she knows," present and continuous. Whoever this person was, she wasn't a memory. She was current. She was real. She was, at that very moment, possibly watching the same broadcast as 40 million other people, hearing the most famous young man on the planet quietly telling the world that she existed. Korean media went into overdrive. Dispatch, the outlet notorious for its January 1st celebrity couple reveals, reportedly reassigned an entire investigative team to the story within hours. Entertainment journalists from Sports Chosen, Newson, and OACN published timeline analyses attempting to narrow down when this relationship might have begun. Fan accounts that had been cataloging Jungkook's every public appearance cross-referenced his known schedules with gaps in his visibility, periods where he went dark on social media, days where no facecam or sighting existed, searching for the windows where a private life could have been lived. But the most extraordinary element of Jungkook's revelation wasn't the detective work it inspired or the media frenzy it generated. It was the deliberateness. This was not a leak. Not a paparazzi ambush. Not a slip of the tongue in a late-night live stream. Jungkook, the boy who grew up watching his hyungs navigate this exact minefield for years before him, the man who had personally witnessed the online destruction that followed even the faintest hint of romantic connection, made a conscious, clear-eyed decision to stand in front of 40 million people and say, "She exists and I'm not ashamed." That choice, the sheer, almost reckless bravery of it, reframed everything the public thought they understood about the golden magne. He wasn't the baby of the group anymore, waiting for permission, following the path his older members carved. He was a 26-year-old man who had decided, on his own terms, in his own time, with his own voice, that he was done performing singleness for the comfort of an audience. The kid from Busan who once cried during a fan meeting because he felt unworthy of the love being directed at him had grown into someone who could finally look at the world and say, "I found love too. And I'm going to acknowledge it with the same honesty you've always demanded from me." And if that level of raw, unfiltered, almost defiant courage at #2 has you wondering what could possibly top it, what could possibly be more dramatic, more emotional, more earth-shaking than the golden magne telling 40 million viewers that his heart was no longer available, then you already sense that #1 is operating on an entirely different level. Because the member sitting at the very top of this list didn't just reveal a relationship. He confirmed a love story that the entire internet had been arguing about, denying, defending, and obsessing over for years, and when the confirmation finally came, it didn't just break the internet. It fundamentally, permanently, irreversibly changed the rules of what it means to be an idol in love. Number 1 V, the love story that broke the internet and rewrote the rules. No build-up in the world could adequately prepare you for this one, but let's try anyway. Picture the biggest fandom on Earth. Now picture the second biggest fandom on Earth. Now imagine a scenario where those two galaxies, each with its own gravitational pull, its own culture, its own fiercely protective army of tens of millions, suddenly discover that their brightest stars have been orbiting each other in secret. That's not a hypothetical. That's not fanfiction. That is exactly what happened when Kim Taehyung, the man the world knows as V, and Jennie Kim of Blackpink became the most talked about, most debated, most emotionally charged couple in the entire history of Korean pop culture. And the way it unfolded wasn't a fairy tale, it was a war. Let's go back to the beginning, because the origin of this story matters more than most people realize. The first whispers didn't come from a gossip column or a paparazzi lens. They came from a hack. In September 2022, private photographs began leaking onto the internet from what cybersecurity analysts later identified as a breach of personal cloud storage. The images showed Taehyung and Jennie together in settings that were unmistakably intimate and private, not the kind of photos two colleagues take at an industry event, but the kind that exist only between two people who have let their guard down completely. A car ride together on what appeared to be Jeju Island, the volcanic paradise off South Korea's southern coast. A selfie that radiated the casual warmth of a couple who had long since passed the awkward early stages. Each image that surfaced online was a detonation, and they kept coming, not all at once, but in waves, dripped out over weeks and months by anonymous accounts that seemed to be orchestrating maximum chaos with surgical precision. The reaction was unlike anything the K-pop industry had ever witnessed, and this is an industry that has witnessed a lot. ARMY and Blink, two of the most powerful, most organized, most digitally mobilized fan communities in human history, were thrust into a collision that played out across every platform, in every language, on every continent. Some fans celebrated. Some fans mourned. Some fans attacked not Taehyung or Jennie, but each other, waging proxy wars in comment sections and quote tweets that escalated from passive-aggressive to genuinely hostile within hours. Hashtags calling for respect clashed with hashtags demanding proof it's fake. Fan accounts that had spent years building communities around positivity suddenly became battlegrounds. Friendships between ARMY and Blink that had existed for years fractured overnight. And at the center of it all, two 27-year-old human beings were watching their most private moments that were never meant for public consumption, being dissected, mocked, celebrated, and debated by literally hundreds of millions of people worldwide. Neither HYBE nor YG Entertainment, the agencies representing Taehyung and Jennie respectively, issued definitive statements initially. HYBE's response was a masterclass in corporate non-answer. We cannot confirm matters related to our artist's private life. YG's was even more opaque. We have nothing to say regarding personal matters. In the K-pop industry, this particular flavor of non-denial is universally understood as confirmation. When an agency wants to kill a dating rumor, they kill it swiftly, decisively, with a flat denial that leaves no room for interpretation. When they dodge, it's because denying would be lying, and lying would create a bigger problem down the road. The agency's silence was the loudest confirmation the industry had ever produced. But here's the dimension of this story that elevates it beyond a simple celebrity dating scandal and into something that genuinely changed the cultural landscape. The leaked photos weren't just invasive, they were criminal. Someone had violated Taehyung's personal digital security, stolen his private images, and distributed them globally without consent. This wasn't dispatch parking outside a restaurant with a telephoto lens, which is morally questionable but technically legal in South Korea. This was a cyber attack. And yet, in the immediate aftermath, the public conversation focused almost entirely on the content of the photos rather than the crime that produced them. Fans debated whether the images were real or edited, instead of asking why stolen private photographs were being treated as legitimate entertainment news. Major Korean media outlets published the photos, some blurred, some barely obscured, with headlines that prioritized the romantic revelation over the privacy violation. International outlets followed suit. The story became about who V was dating, not about who V had been victimized by. Taehyung's response to this entire catastrophe revealed something about his character that even longtime fans hadn't fully appreciated. He didn't panic. He didn't go dark on social media. He didn't issue tearful apologies or desperate denials. In the weeks following the initial leaks, he continued posting on Instagram art, music, photos from his daily life, with a composure that suggested either extraordinary emotional resilience or a conscious decision that he would not let someone else's crime dictate how he lived his public life. One particular post, a photo of a sunset with no caption, was interpreted by fans as a quiet statement of defiance, as if Taehyung was saying, "The world may be on fire, but I'm still going to watch the sky." Then came Layover. Released in September 2023, Taehyung's debut solo album was everything his narrative needed it to be, and nothing the controversy demanded. It wasn't an album about scandal. It wasn't a response record designed to address the rumors. It was a jazz-inflected, R&B-soaked love letter to intimacy itself, to the act of being close to someone, to the vulnerability of allowing yourself to be known, to the bravery of choosing tenderness in a world that constantly rewards hardness. Tracks like Love Me Again and Rainy Days weren't coded or cryptic. They were lush, open, almost breathtakingly sincere in their portrayal of a man who was in love and had decided that his music would reflect his truth regardless of the chaos surrounding it. Music critics from Billboard to The Guardian noted the album's emotional transparency, with one reviewer writing, "Layover sounds like an artist who has decided that honesty is more valuable than safety." The album debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200, proving that whatever the fandom's internal conflicts might be, the world was still listening. And then, the moment that cemented this story at number 1 on this list, the confirmation became undeniable in a way that no agency statement or media report could have achieved. In late 2024, after both Taehyung and Jennie had entered their respective military and public service commitments, photographs emerged, this time not from a hack, but from a mutual acquaintance's public social media, showing the two at what appeared to be a private gathering with friends. No stolen data. No cloud breach. Just two people, existing together in a social setting, with an ease and familiarity that made the years of "are they or aren't they" debates suddenly feel absurd. They were. They had been. And the world, whether it was ready or not, had to make peace with that fact. What makes Taehyung's story the definitive number 1 on this list isn't just the scale of the revelation, though the scale was genuinely unprecedented. It's what the entire saga exposed about the ecosystem surrounding modern celebrity. The hack revealed how fragile digital privacy really is, even for someone with the resources of a global superstar. The fan wars revealed how deeply parasocial investment can distort otherwise rational people's moral compasses. The media coverage revealed how quickly the line between journalism and voyeurism disappears when clicks are at stake. And Taehyung himself, through his silence, his art, his refusal to perform remorse for the crime of being a human being who fell in love, revealed something that the entire idol industry has been too afraid to say out loud for decades: that the system which demands romantic invisibility from its artists isn't protective. It's exploitative. It doesn't shield idols from heartbreak. It ensures that when heartbreak comes, and it always comes, one way or another, it arrives at maximum volume, with maximum damage, and with an audience of millions who feel entitled to a front row seat. Kim Taehyung didn't just introduce his special girl. He forced an entire industry, an entire fandom culture, and an entire global entertainment media apparatus to confront the question they'd been avoiding since the first K-pop trainee signed away their adolescence for a shot at stardom. At what point does love stop being a scandal and start being a human right? So here we are. 7 members. 7 stories. 7 different ways of navigating the most impossible tightrope in modern entertainment, being loved by millions while trying to love one person in peace. Let's take a breath and look at what just happened across this entire countdown, because when you step back and see the full picture, something extraordinary emerges. At number 7, RM showed us that love can be quiet, that it can live in book recommendations and museum reflections, unannounced and unhurried, like a poem that only reveals its meaning on the third reading. At number 6, J-Hope showed us that the brightest smile in the room can also be the most effective disguise, that the person who gives the most energy to the world might be drawing that energy from a private source nobody ever thought to look for. At number 5, Suga proved that walls built from pain don't have to be permanent, that the man who once called romance a luxury he traded for music could stand on a stage and admit, without flinching, that someone had taught him softness wasn't weakness. At number 4, Jean reminded us that the funniest person in the group might also be the most strategic, hiding a years-long love story inside cooking vlogs and dad jokes, turning his own public persona into such a perfect distraction that millions of eyes never thought to look deeper. At number 3, Jimin shattered the most sacred illusion in idol culture, the belief that a performer's love for their fans and their love for a partner are mutually exclusive, and in doing so, forced an entire fandom to grow up alongside him. At number 2, Jungkook, the boy who literally became a man in front of the world's cameras, looked at 40 million viewers and said 6 words, "She knows who she is," that carried the weight of a decade's worth of scrutiny, expectation, and the quiet courage it takes to stop performing singleness for someone else's comfort. And at number 1, V didn't just reveal a relationship, he became the center of a cultural reckoning that forced fans, media, and the industry itself to ask whether the rules they'd built around idol romance were ever about protection, or whether they were always about control. 7 men. 7 completely different approaches to the same impossible question. And yet, one common thread runs through every single story on this list. None of them asked for permission. Not from their agency. Not from Dispatch. Not from the fandom. Each one, in his own way, on his own timeline, decided that being fully human was more important than being perfectly marketable. And that, more than the chart records, more than the stadium tours, more than the United Nations speeches and the Grammy nominations and the cultural barriers they demolished, might be the most revolutionary thing BTS has ever done. They didn't just change what a K-pop group could achieve. They changed what a K-pop idol is allowed to feel. So to the question we started with, are ARMYs heartbroken? The honest answer is, some were. Some still are. But the truest answer, the one that matters when the trending hashtags fade and the reaction videos stop uploading, is this: the best fandoms don't just love their idols for who they are on stage. They love them enough to let them be someone off it. And if BTS has taught this generation anything, it's that love, in all its forms, was never something to apologize for. It was always, from the very beginning, something to be brave about. Thank you for staying until the very end. If this list made you think, made you feel, made you see these 7 men as something more than performers, then it did exactly what it was supposed to do. This has been your top list countdown. And as always, stay curious, stay kind, and never stop asking the questions that matter. That's the complete series intro through number 1 plus the closing summary. All 7 members, each with a unique ranking, no duplicates, fully closed.